The first sound was the steady, reassuring beep of the heart monitor, a digital metronome counting out the seconds of a life held in careful balance. The second was the whisper squeak of her rubber-soled shoes against the polished linoleum. For Nurse Anya Sharma, these were the sounds of a normal Tuesday. They were the sounds of control, of order, of a world where problems had protocols and emergencies had checklists. But a third sound was bleeding through the thick, hurricane-rated glass of the ICU window. It was a low, mournful howl that was steadily climbing in pitch, the sound of a city holding its breath. "You're just about done, Mr. Henderson," Anya said, her voice a soft counterpoint to the rising wind. She finished adjusting the drip on his IV, her movements economical and precise. She gave his frail, paper-skinned hand a gentle pat. "Your daughter will be here in the morning. You just rest." The old man's eyes, clouded with cataracts, blinked slowly. A faint smile touched his lips. It was all the thanks she needed. As she made her final chart notations at the central nursing station, the wall-mounted television, muted but for the closed captions scrolling ominously across the bottom, painted a grim picture. Hurricane Maya upgraded to Category 5, unprecedented. Evacuate coastal areas immediately. The cone of uncertainty on the weather map had collapsed, its menacing red tip now aimed directly at Miami. This was no longer just a storm. It was a monster. "Sharma." The voice was as crisp and sterile as a fresh alcohol wipe. Anya looked up to see Miss Evelyn Reed, the director of nursing, standing with a tablet clutched in her hand like a stone commandment. Reed was a woman who seemed to have been assembled from a kit of sharp angles and muted colors. Her salt and pepper hair was pulled back into a bun so severe it looked like it could crack. She didn't walk. She moved through the ward with the frictionless purpose of a shark. "You're logging 12 minutes of non-essential patient interaction with Henderson," Reed stated, not looking up from her screen. "His chart doesn't indicate a need for psychosocial intervention. He was anxious about the storm, Ms. Reed. I was just calming him down." "Emotional labor isn't billable," Reed said, the phrase sounding worn from overuse. "Remember our time, motion efficiency goals for this quarter. Clock out, go home. The lockdown protocol begins in 1 hour. Anyone who stays, stays until it's over." Anya nodded, her jaw tightening. To Reed, Mr. Henderson wasn't a frightened grandfather. He was a data point, a column in a spreadsheet of billable hours. This was the reality of modern healthcare, a constant, soul-crushing tug-of-war between compassion and corporate metrics. She gathered her things from her locker, the exhaustion of a 12-hour shift settling deep into her bones. All she wanted was her tiny apartment, a cup of tea, and the reassuring purr of her cat, Milo. Her phone buzzed. It was Maria, the night nurse scheduled to relieve her. "Anya, I'm so sorry. The causeway is already flooded. The police have closed it. I can't get in. There's no one else." Anya's heart sank. She looked around the ICU. They were already on a skeleton crew. If she left, there would be only one other registered nurse and 2 aides to manage 12 critical patients. With a Category 5 hurricane bearing down, the ER would be overflowing. The sickest would be sent up here. Leaving wasn't just irresponsible, it was unthinkable. She walked back toward the nursing station, her decision solidifying with each step. She saw Ms. Reed directing staff with sharp, impatient gestures. "Ms. Reed," Anya said, her voice steady. "Maria can't make it in. The causeway is closed. I'm staying." Reed gave her a look of profound annoyance, as if Anya's sense of duty was a personal inconvenience. "Fine," she huffed, already turning away. "But all overtime must be pre-approved. Don't be a hero, Sharma. Be a time card puncher." Anya watched her go, the woman's words hanging in the air, a stark and chilling prophecy. A deep rumble shook the hospital, the first real tremor from Maya's outer bands. The lights flickered once, twice, then held steady. The reassuring beep of the heart monitors continued their rhythm, but now it sounded less like a metronome and more like a countdown. Anya took a deep breath, the sanitized air feeling electric. She was no longer clocking in for a shift. She was strapping in for a siege. The first 24 hours were a controlled fall into chaos. The monster, Maya, made landfall with the sound of a freight train derailing in the sky. Rain didn't fall. It moved horizontally, a solid wall of water that turned the world outside the ICU windows into a churning, gray blur. The hospital shuddered with each gust, a concrete behemoth groaning under the assault. Anya moved in a state of heightened awareness, the fatigue of her previous shift burned away by a fresh surge of adrenaline. The ER was a war zone, and the casualties were being sent up to her. a car crash victim with massive internal bleeding, a man who'd had a heart attack trying to board up his windows, a child with a severe asthma attack triggered by the terrifying pressure drop. Anya, alongside the one other RN, David, and 2 nursing aides, became a 4-person whirlwind of focused energy. They were no longer just nurses, they were the last line of defense. It was around hour 15 that an elderly woman named Eleanor Finch was wheeled in from a lower acuity ward. The flooding in the hospital's west wing had forced an evacuation, and her pneumonia had taken a turn for the worse. Her paperwork was brief. Her emergency contact a son who was listed as being out of the country. She was quiet, with wide, frightened eyes that seemed to absorb all the chaos around her. In the frenetic triage of the storm, she was just another patient, another chart, another set of vitals to monitor. Anya got her settled, checked her oxygen levels, and promised to look in on her soon before being pulled away by a crashing patient down the hall. Ms. Reed was a ghost, a phantom presence felt only through the occasional, impersonal group text sent from the shielded administration wing. Remember to log all supply usage. Incident reports must be filed within the hour. Keep chatter on the comms to a minimum. It was the voice of a system utterly disconnected from the human reality of the crisis. The true darkness came at hour 28. With a deafening crack that seemed to split the sky, a transformer outside the hospital exploded. The main lights went out. The humming machinery of the ICU fell silent. For 3 terrifying seconds, the only sound was the howling of the hurricane. Then, the tertiary generators sputtered to life with a guttural roar. A string of dim, red emergency lights clicked on, casting the ward in an apocalyptic glow. Only the most essential equipment had power. The central monitors were dark. The electronic charting system was gone. Life support machines, thankfully, were still breathing for those who could not, but half the ventilators were now just plastic and metal. "Bag him!" Anya shouted, pointing to a patient whose ventilator had failed. "David, check the others. Rosa, find the flashlights." They were thrown back into a different era of medicine. They began manually ventilating patients with ambu bags, a rhythmic squeezing, hour after hour, that was both life-saving and brutally exhausting. They navigated the darkened rooms with beams from their phones and a few precious emergency flashlights. Their world shrunk to small circles of light in a sea of red-tinged darkness. It was in this deep, disorienting gloom, somewhere around hour 40, that Anya stumbled past Eleanor Finch's room. The old woman was not asleep. She was curled into a tight ball, her body trembling, a thin hospital blanket doing little to ward off the chill that had crept into the air. Her oxygen cannula had slipped. Every instinct in Anya's exhausted body screamed at her to keep moving, to check the next monitor, to titrate the next drip. There was no time, but she stopped. She stepped into the room, the beam of her phone's flashlight cutting through the darkness. "Eleanor?" she whispered. The woman flinched. "It's okay. It's Nurse Sharma. You're shivering." Anya adjusted the cannula, her touch gentle. She scanned the room and saw nothing, then remembered a small, rarely used supply closet at the end of the hall. She found what she was looking for, a cache of thick fleece blankets reserved for hypothermia patients. She grabbed one and returned to Eleanor's side. She unfolded the heavy blanket and draped it over the woman, tucking it in around her frail shoulders. Eleanor's trembling began to subside. Anya sat on the edge of the bed for a moment, a brief island of stillness in the relentless storm of her duties. She took Eleanor's hand. It was cold and bony. "It's a terrible noise, isn't it?" Anya said softly, referring to the wind. Eleanor just nodded, her eyes wide. From a pocket in her scrubs, Anya pulled out a small, sealed cup of apple juice she'd saved from her own emergency locker ration. She peeled back the foil lid and helped the woman take a few sips. It was a minuscule gesture, a sip of juice, a warm blanket, a hand to hold in the dark. In the grand scheme of the lives she was saving, it was nothing. But in the terrifying intimacy of that moment, it was everything. Anya began to hum a simple, nameless tune her own grandmother used to sing, and for the first time in hours, she saw the fear in Eleanor's eyes recede, replaced by a flicker of peace. A code alarm blared from down the hall, and Anya had to go, squeezing the old woman's hand one last time before disappearing back into the chaos. The final 24 hours were a descent into a surreal, waking nightmare. Anya's body was a screaming chorus of aches. Her feet were numb, her back a column of fire. Her mind, deprived of sleep, began to play tricks on her. She saw shadows move in her peripheral vision, heard whispered voices in the howl of the wind. Yet, her training held fast. Her hands were steady as she inserted an IV into a collapsed vein. Her voice was calm and authoritative as she directed the others. She was operating on a primal level of instinct and muscle memory. The breaking point nearly came in the form of a man whose father was a patient. He'd somehow broken through the lockdown, his face a mask of fear and rage. He cornered Anya, his voice booming in the eerily quiet hall. "Why isn't he being moved? The roof is leaking in his room. Are you all just going to let him die?" Anya, running on 60 hours of no sleep and pure adrenaline, stood before him, not as an authority figure, but as a shield. She didn't argue, she just listened. When he was done, his anger spent, she spoke in a low, even voice. "I understand you're scared. We all are. I can't move your father right now. It's not safe. But I promise you, I will check on him every 15 minutes. I will not let anything happen to him." Her profound, inhuman patience disarmed him. He deflated, mumbling an apology, and retreated. The final act of her marathon shift came at hour 71. Mr. Henderson, the patient she had comforted what felt like a lifetime ago, went into cardiac arrest. His heart monitor, one of the few still working, blared its shrill, flatline tone. "Crash cart, now!" Anya commanded. There was no team of doctors to rush in. There was only her, David, and the two aides. They worked in a fluid, practiced rhythm. Anya was on the chest, compressions hard and fast, counting aloud as David managed his airway. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. The moments stretched into an eternity. One shock from the defibrillator. Nothing. Another round of compressions. A second shock. And then, a beep. A single, beautiful, glorious beep on the monitor. A rhythm, weak but present, returned. Mr. Henderson was back. Anya fell back against the wall, her legs trembling, the last of her reserves gone. As the 72nd hour ticked over, the howling of the wind began to subside. The rain softened to a drizzle. Through the grimy window, Anya could see the first, pale sliver of a bruised dawn. It was over. The storm had broken. And she was still standing. The arrival of the morning relief staff felt like a scene from a different reality. They came in wearing clean, crisp scrubs, their faces etched with concern but still fresh, their hair dry. They looked at the state of the ICU, the dark corridors, the scattered supplies, the exhausted, hollowed-out shells of Anya and her skeleton crew with a kind of reverent horror. "My God, Anya," said a nurse named Brenda, her eyes wide. "How did you—" Anya didn't have the energy to answer. She just handed over a meticulously detailed report on every patient, all written by hand on scrap paper under the beam of a flashlight. Her duty was done. She clocked out on a manual override sheet, her signature a barely legible scrawl. The drive home was a blur. She navigated streets littered with fallen palm fronds and debris, her mind a quiet, empty landscape. She stumbled into her apartment, was greeted by a concerned meow from Milo, and collapsed into bed without even taking off her scrubs. She slept for 12 straight hours, a deep, comatose slumber that offered no dreams and no rest. She awoke to a throbbing headache and the insistent, jarring buzz of her phone. There were 5 missed calls and a dozen texts. A new email sat at the top of her inbox, its subject line in cold, corporate capital letters. From our department, Miami General. Subject: mandatory meeting regarding your recent shifts. 8:0 am tomorrow. Anya frowned. Mandatory meeting? She figured it was a standard post-crisis debriefing. Maybe they even wanted to give her a commendation. A small, weary part of her hoped for a simple, "thank you." The next morning, she walked back into the hospital. The power was fully restored, the cleanup crews were at work, and the hum of normalcy was returning. It felt strange, as if the 72-hour siege had been a fever dream. But the ache in her muscles was real. The exhaustion that clung to her like a shroud was real. She was directed not to the nursing administration office, but to a sterile, windowless conference room in the HR wing. The air inside was cold. Ms. Evelyn Reed sat at one side of a long, polished table, her posture rigid. Beside her was a man in a gray suit whose face was a carefully neutral mask, the HR representative. "Ms. Sharma, thank you for coming in," the HR rep said, his voice as colorless as his suit. He gestured to the empty chair opposite them. "Please, have a seat." There were no pleasantries. Reed slid a file across the table. It was Anya's. "We have reviewed your conduct during the emergency period," Reed began, her voice devoid of any warmth. "And we have found several significant violations of hospital policy." Anya's mind reeled. Violations? First, Reed continued, tapping a finger on a document. You logged over 60 hours of unapproved overtime. This is a major breach of labor protocol. But Maria couldn't get in, Anya stammered. There was no one else. We would have been overwhelmed. The protocol in that situation, the HR rep cut in smoothly, is to escalate to the on-call administrator to authorize emergency staffing measures. There is no record of you doing so. The main comms were down. The generators failed. Secondly, Ms. Reed said, ignoring her completely, you took it upon yourself to make executive command decisions regarding patient triage and resource allocation without consulting a superior. You were in the administration wing. We couldn't reach you. Anya's voice was rising, a note of disbelief creeping in. People were dying! Which brings us to our most serious concern, Reed said, her voice dropping, a theatrical display of feigned gravity. By remaining on duty for 72 consecutive hours, you knowingly placed our patients at risk. The potential for fatigue-related error is astronomical. You became a liability, Ms. Sharma, a danger to the very people you were supposed to be caring for. Anya stared at them, speechless. The air left her lungs. This wasn't a debriefing. It was an interrogation, an ambush. They were twisting her sacrifice into a crime. They were using the rulebook to negate the reality she had lived through. I saved lives, Anya whispered, the words feeling hollow in the sterile room. Mr. Henderson. He went into cardiac arrest. We brought him back. And we are fortunate that your reckless behavior did not result in a catastrophic outcome, the HR rep said. The hospital's liability insurance has strict clauses about staff fitness for duty. Your actions exposed this entire institution to an unacceptable level of risk. Ms. Reed delivered the final, clinical blow. Effective immediately, your employment at Miami General is terminated. Your actions constitute gross negligence and insubordination. Termination. The word didn't compute. It was an alien sound, a language she didn't understand. She looked from Reed's cold, triumphant eyes to the HR rep's impassive face. They had their narrative. The lone nurse who went rogue, a dangerous hero complex, a liability they had to neutralize. It protected them. It protected the hospital. It erased her. The policies are in place to protect the hospital, Ms. Sharma, the HR rep added, as if for clarity. Your personal feelings of duty do not supersede them. It was over in less than 10 minutes. A security guard, a young man who looked deeply uncomfortable, was called to escort her to her locker. He held out a cardboard box for her things. As Anya walked through the ICU, her ICU, the whispers started. Nurses she had worked beside, laughed with, and supported, now looked away. Some shot her looks of pity, others of judgment. She was no longer a colleague. She was a cautionary tale. The guard walked her all the way to the front entrance. A final, quiet humiliation. The automatic glass doors slid open, and Anya stepped out into the bright, sunny Florida day. The air was clean, the sky a brilliant blue. The world had survived the storm. But her world, the one she had dedicated her life to, had just been utterly and completely destroyed. She stood on the sidewalk, a cardboard box clutched in her numb hands, a hero who had been fired for her own heroism. The first few days were a thick, suffocating fog of despair. Anya's small apartment, once her sanctuary, now felt like a prison. The silence was deafening, broken only by the concerned meows of Milo, who seemed to sense her anguish and would rub against her legs, purring furiously as if trying to mend her broken spirit. She sat on her couch for hours, replaying the scene in the conference room. The clinical words, the dead eyes of the HR representative, the triumphant glint in Ms. Reed's stare. They had taken her sacrifice, her exhaustion, her very soul, and twisted it into a liability. The betrayal was a physical ache in her chest, a cold, heavy weight that made it hard to breathe. She did what you were supposed to do. She called the state nursing union. The woman on the other end of the line was sympathetic but overwhelmed. We've got hundreds of calls, honey, she'd said, her voice tired. Hospitals are using the storm as an excuse for all sorts of things. We'll open a file for you, but a grievance process? It could take months, even a year. And honestly, they'll just say they fired you for cause. It's a tough one to fight. A year. Anya looked at her bank account. She had enough savings to last maybe 2 months, 3 if she ate nothing but ramen. The system designed to protect her was a slow, bureaucratic beast, just as cold and impersonal as the one that had just chewed her up and spit her out. She felt utterly, terrifyingly alone. Miles away from Anya's world of despair, in a penthouse that floated above the recovering city like a glass castle, a very different conversation was taking place. Alistair Finch sat in a soft leather armchair, a cup of steaming tea untouched beside him. His mother, Eleanor, was tucked under a cashmere blanket on the sofa opposite him. She was home, she was safe, and she was talking. Alistair was a titan of the tech world, a man known for his brutal efficiency and a near-mythical reclusiveness. He appeared in public only when necessary, and his public persona was one of a cold, calculating genius. But here, with his mother, the ice melted. He was just a son, and he was listening intently. And then the lights went out, Alistair. It was so dark and the noise. I thought the building was coming down, Eleanor said, her voice thin but clear. I was so cold. I thought, this is it. This is how it ends. She paused, her eyes looking at something far away. And then she came in, an angel in the dark, a nurse. I think her name was Anya. She had a little light, and she found me another blanket, a thick one. She tucked me in, and she held my hand. She gave me some of her own juice. Eleanor's eyes welled with tears. She hummed a little song. It was the first moment I felt safe. She wasn't just doing a job, dear. She was caring. In all that madness, she took a moment to care for one old woman. I think she saved me. Alistair listened, his own carefully guarded emotions stirring. His mother was his world, the one soft spot in his armor-plated life. He had spent a fortune to ensure she had the best care, but in the end, it wasn't the expensive machines or the high-priced doctors. It was one nurse, in the dark, with a warm blanket. I want to thank her, Mother, he said, his voice thick. Properly. He made a call. Marcus, he said to his chief of staff, a man whose loyalty and efficiency were legendary. I need you to find a nurse at Miami General. Her name is Anya Sharma. She was in the ICU during the hurricane. I want to make a significant donation to the hospital in her name, and I want to arrange a personal bonus for her. A substantial one. Right away, Mr. Finch, Marcus replied. Marcus was a man who could navigate the labyrinthine corridors of power with a few quiet phone calls. He started with the hospital's foundation office, inquiring about making a donation in honor of a specific nurse. The administrator was thrilled, gushing about their heroic staff. Marcus asked to be put in touch with Ms. Sharma to coordinate. There was a brief pause. The administrator came back on the line, her voice suddenly stilted. It seems Ms. Sharma is no longer an employee here. That was the first red flag. Marcus's instincts, honed over years of corporate espionage and crisis management, tingled. He pushed, gently but firmly. The administrator clammed up, citing privacy concerns. So, Marcus changed tactics. He called a contact he had on the hospital's board of directors, cashing in a favor. 20 minutes later, his phone rang. The board member, his voice low, told him the unofficial story. He then called a headhunter he knew, who had connections with several nurses at Miami General. For the price of a generous finder's fee, he got 2 nurses to speak with him off the record. Piece by piece, the story came together. The 72-hour shift, the power failure, the resuscitation, and then the firing. The cold, clinical execution in the HR conference room. The official reasoning, gross negligence, and insubordination. Marcus compiled his findings into a brief, bullet-pointed report and walked back into Alistair Finch's living room. He presented the facts without emotion. Alistair read the report on Marcus's tablet. He read it once, then he read it again, his face growing darker with every line. The gratitude he had felt morphed into a cold, hard, diamond-pure rage. This wasn't just an injustice, it was a perversion. They had taken an act of supreme humanity and punished it as a bureaucratic failing. They had hurt the person who had saved his mother. He looked up at Marcus, his eyes like chips of flint. Cancel the donation, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. They don't deserve a dime. He stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the city below. They wanted to treat a human being like a liability on a balance sheet. Fine. I'll show them what a real liability looks like. He turned back to his chief of staff. We are not sending a donation, Marcus. We are sending a message. Get our legal team on a conference call, and get the cars. All of them. Anya was staring at a job posting for a cashier at a 24-hour convenience store. The qualifications were a high school diploma and the ability to stand for 8 hours. It felt like a punch to the gut. Was this what her years of training, her skill, her passion had been reduced to? A life of scanning barcodes and stocking shelves? A sharp, authoritative knock echoed from her apartment door. Not the gentle tap of a neighbor, but something else. Something official. Her heart leaped into her throat. Was it the hospital? Had they sent someone to serve her with a lawsuit for talking to the union? She peered through the peephole, her breath catching. A man in a suit so perfectly tailored it seemed molded to him stood in the hallway. He looked impossibly out of place in her modest, slightly shabby apartment complex. Behind him she could see another man, equally well-dressed, standing discreetly by the stairwell. Hesitantly, she opened the door, leaving the chain on. "Can I help you?" "Miss Anya Sharma?" the man asked. His voice was calm and professional. "My name is Marcus Thorne. I work for Alistair Finch." The name meant nothing to Anya. "I'm sorry, I don't know who that is." "His mother, Eleanor Finch, was a patient of yours during the storm," Marcus explained. Anya's mind flashed back to the small, shivering woman in the dark. "Eleanor, is she okay?" It was her first instinctive question. A small smile touched Marcus's lips. "She's perfectly fine. Thanks in no small part to you. Mr. Finch is immensely grateful. He's also aware of your subsequent employment situation." Anya stiffened. "I can't talk about that." "You don't have to," Marcus said gently. "We know everything. Mr. Finch would very much like to speak with you in person. He sent us to bring you to him." Anya's eyes narrowed with suspicion. This felt surreal, like a dream or an elaborate scam. "I'm not sure." "Ms. Sharma," Marcus said, his voice kind but firm. "Please, just look out the window." She glanced past him, down the hallway to the window that overlooked the street. Her jaw went slack. Parked along the curb of her working-class neighborhood, nestled between dented pickup trucks and aging sedans, was a fleet of gleaming black cars. She counted them. 1, 2, 3, 10. There were 10 of them. Rolls-Royces, Bentleys, Mercedes-Maybachs. They shone under the afternoon sun like polished obsidian, so out of place they looked like they had been photoshopped into existence. Neighbors were creeping out onto their porches, staring, their phones held up to take pictures. The sheer, overwhelming absurdity of the sight broke through her suspicion. This was not a scam. This was something else entirely. She slowly unhooked the chain. The ride to downtown Miami was silent and surreal. Anya sat on plush leather that smelled of wealth, watching her neighborhood give way to towering skyscrapers of glass and steel. They didn't go to a house or a hospital. They went to the top floor of the city's most iconic skyscraper, Finch Enterprises. She was led into an office that was larger than her entire apartment, with a view that encompassed the entire city and the endless blue of the Atlantic beyond. Alistair Finch stood to greet her. He was younger than she expected, with intense, intelligent eyes that seemed to see right through her. "Miss Sharma," he said, shaking her hand. "My mother told me you were an angel." She wasn't exaggerating. "Thank you. What you did for her, for everyone in that ICU, it was an act of profound courage." Anya, dressed in her simple jeans and a faded t-shirt, felt a blush creep up her neck. "I was just doing my job." "No," Alistair said, his voice hardening. "You were doing far more than that, and your employer's response was a disgrace." He gestured for her to sit. "I could just write you a check, a very large one. You would never have to work again. But I don't think that's justice. That's just a settlement. You deserve justice." He leaned forward, his eyes locking on hers. "I am creating a new philanthropic foundation with an initial endowment of $2 billion. It will be called the Sharma Finch Foundation for Healthcare Advocacy. Its sole purpose will be to fight the corporate rot in our healthcare system. It will provide free legal services, financial support, and a public voice for nurses, doctors, and any medical staff who are punished for putting patients before profits. It will fund investigative journalism to expose hospital mismanagement. It will lobby for legislation to protect caregivers." He paused, letting the words sink in. "And I want you to run it." Anya stared at him, her mind unable to process the scale of what he was saying. "Me? I'm a nurse. I don't know how to run a foundation." "You know what matters," Alistair countered. "You know the struggle. You have the integrity. I can hire people to handle the paperwork and the legal briefs. I can't hire your heart, Miss Sharma. I can't hire your experience. I'm offering you an army. I'm offering you a weapon. I want you to be the one to wield it." As he spoke, Marcus, standing quietly in the corner, was executing the second phase of the plan. A meticulously crafted press release, complete with off-the-record quotes from other nurses at Miami General, was sent to every major news outlet in the country. A dedicated website for the new foundation went live, its front page telling Anya's story in stark, powerful detail. Within the hour, the story exploded. It was the perfect human interest rage bait narrative. The heroic nurse, the hurricane, the heartless corporation, the surprise billionaire savior. Stand With Anya began trending on social media. News vans, redirected from post-hurricane coverage, descended on Miami General like vultures. Ms. Evelyn Reed was leaving for the day when a reporter shoved a microphone in her face. "Ms. Reed, can you comment on the allegations that you fired a nurse for saving lives during the hurricane?" She paled, stammering no comment as she fled to her car. The hospital's CEO was inundated with calls. Their PR department issued a weak, jargon-filled statement about protecting patient safety that only added fuel to the fire. The hospital's stock, publicly traded, began to nosedive. Down on the street, a crowd of protesters, mostly other nurses and healthcare workers, began to gather outside the hospital, holding signs that read, "Patients over profits," and "Anya is a hero." The local police department, which had been so quick to close the causeway, now had to be dispatched to manage the demonstration. The authority figures who had held Anya's life in their hands just days before were now scrambling, their power dissolving in the face of a story they couldn't control. From the top of the Finch Tower, Anya watched the news reports flood in on a massive screen Alistair had turned on. She saw the faces of the protesters. She saw the panicked expression on Ms. Reed's face. The weight of despair that had been crushing her began to lift, replaced by a feeling she hadn't felt in a long time. It was hope. But it was a new kind of hope, not the quiet hope of a survivor, but the fierce, burning hope of a fighter. 6 months later, the woman who stood at the podium was not the same one who had been escorted out of Miami General with her life in a cardboard box. This Anya Sharma wore a tailored navy blue suit, her posture exuding a quiet confidence that commanded the attention of the packed conference hall. The audience was a sea of faces, nurses, paramedics, medical technicians, all looking up at her with a mixture of admiration and hope. "They called me a liability," Anya began, her voice clear and steady, amplified by the microphone. "They said my dedication was a risk. They used their policies and their protocols as a shield to hide the fact that their system is designed to protect profits first and people second. They wanted me to be an example. And you know what? They succeeded." A murmur went through the crowd. "I am an example," she continued, a powerful smile gracing her lips. "An example of what happens when we refuse to be silent. An example of what happens when we stand together and say, 'Enough.'" They thought my story ended when they handed me that pink slip, but it was just the beginning. The hall erupted in thunderous applause. In the half-year since that fateful meeting in Alistair Finch's office, the Sharma Finch Foundation had become a force of nature. With a team of the country's most tenacious lawyers, they had filed a class-action lawsuit against the hospital's parent corporation for systemic unsafe staffing practices, a case that was sending shockwaves through the industry. They had established a 24-hour whistleblower hotline that was flooded with calls from healthcare workers across the nation. Ms. Evelyn Reed had been quietly terminated after an internal investigation, a scapegoat offered up by the board to quell the PR nightmare. She was now unemployable, her name synonymous with corporate heartlessness. The hospital had a new CEO, a man who spoke endlessly about rebuilding trust and valuing our frontline heroes. It was a start. Anya was no longer just a nurse. She was an advocate, a leader, a symbol. She spent her days not in scrubs, but in boardrooms and on television interviews, fighting battles for people she would never meet, ensuring that what happened to her would not happen to them. After her speech, as she was surrounded by well-wishers, she caught a glimpse of a familiar face in the crowd. It was Mr. Henderson's daughter. She made her way over. "I never got to thank you," the woman said, her eyes wet with tears. "My father is alive today because you stayed. You're a hero." Anya smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile. "I was just doing my job." This time, the words felt different. They were no longer a defense, but a simple statement of fact. She had done her job, and in doing so, had found a new, larger one. She looked out at the faces in the crowd, the healers and helpers of the world, her world. She hadn't set out to be a revolutionary. She had just wanted to care for a frightened old woman in a dark, storm-tossed room. But she had learned that in a system that has lost its way, a single, unwavering act of kindness can be the most revolutionary act of all.